Hey everybody, welcome to week 14 of science fiction. This is our next to last lecture, and this is our last full lecture of the class. Um, so we have a lot of things to cover, not only in terms of lecture, but also just wrapping up things and showing you how to submit your research essay. So let's go ahead and hop right into it, but I guess before we do that, just a reminder, if you get a chance to get vaccinated, please take it. I'm getting my second shot on the 19th. I'm looking forward to that. Continue to mask up, get plenty of sleep, eat good. You do everything you can, masking up, maintaining safe social distance from others to protect yourselves during this last phase, this last push to finish the spring semester. I know it's been hard on everybody, but we're almost there. I can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I hope that you can too. So hang in there just a little bit longer and do everything that you can to protect yourself and others as we get through this last bit of the semester. So what do we need to do today? So first off, just another reminder, please fill out the student evaluation of teaching forms that you should have gotten your email. Should have got one for my class and all the other classes that you're taking. It's an opportunity for you to give me some feedback that's totally anonymous. There's a section you bubble in things, and also a section where you can write some comments. Those written comments are particularly valuable to me. If you like the class, let me know about it. What did you like about the class? Do you have some ideas about how to make the class better? Put those in there, because I will listen to you all and incorporate that stuff the next time I teach science fiction. So please take a moment to do that. Then we're going to have the lecture on Cyberpunk in just a moment. But just to briefly go over everything, that this week will be your last weekly writing assignment. You'll be summarizing the lecture on Cyberpunk and the readings and viewings for this week's class. So this will be the last one you got to do, and it'll be due before next week. Then wrapping up all the assignments. So by next Wednesday, May 19th, everything comes due. That last weekly writing assignment will be due. Also, your final handwritten notebook scans. Remember, it has to be handwritten. That'll be due on Dropbox. And I have a link to that in the notebook section over on the left side navigation menu of our OpenLab site. But what I'm going to do with this week's lecture post on our OpenLab site, I'm going to break down where everything is due and like where you need to put it. So there'll be a link there for your final notebook and the Dropbox submission link. Same is true for your final exam. Last week, I published all the questions for your final exam. You need to give me handwritten responses, scan those into a PDF using like Dropbox or the Google Drive app that you can install on your phone. Those are both available for Android as well as for iOS. And there's a lot of other programs, apps that you can download that will accomplish the same thing. Basically, you take a picture of each page, and the app combines all those individual images into a single PDF file, which you can then upload to those special links that I created for our class. And then finally, you got your research essay that you've been working on for weeks and weeks now, right? Probably forgotten when you started this thing, with the way time has been warped and shift, not because of science fiction, but because of this environment we're living in through the pandemic. But this we will be turning in on OpenLab as a post. So in the tail end of today's lecture, I'll show you how to submit your research essay. You basically will create a post on our OpenLab site and copy and paste your work into that post. So that'll be at the end of today's lecture, so don't miss that. And then a final word, remember, late work can be received until the end of day on Tuesday, May 25th. That's like the latest that I can receive things, because I got to grade everything very quickly, and then I got to get grades in before summer semester starts, which is going to be Friday the 28th. So you got to get your work to me by Tuesday, May 25th, at the very latest for any late work. I'll grade it, add that to your final grades and get those grades uploaded to CUNY first. And if anybody's got any questions about these due dates, about late work due dates, about any of the assignments in the class, just email me, jellis@citytech.cuny.edu, and also make use of my office hours. I might have office hours this week, Wednesday 3 to 5, and I'll also have them the final week, next week, on Wednesday from 3 until 5. That'll be Wednesday, May 19th. So make use of that. I have spoke to very few of you. I don't know who any of you are except those folks that I've spoken with. So this is an opportunity for us to interact a little bit, even though we are in this asynchronous mode. If you have questions, again, email me or come to office hours. And so let's go ahead and get into this week's lecture. Today's reading by William Gibson, Burning Chrome, is an important example of the subgenre or literary movement that came to be known as cyberpunk. Consider these relationships. The Golden Age responds to the pulp era. The New Wave and feminist SF responds to the Golden Age. And cyberpunk in turn is a response to what had come before and to its present historical moment. It carried the trace of science fiction in its themes, tropes, and images, but it reworked SF as a response to its historical and cultural moment, just as the previous SF eras had done. Cyberpunk, sometimes called a subgenre and sometimes called a movement, is the kind of SF that imagines a near future where computer technology, technologies of bodily enhancement, and the networks of global capital have opened up new possibilities and created new challenges. Now, before we discuss cyberpunk and its authors, let's take a look at its background context. Now, the counterculture of the late 1960s and 1970s, emblematized by the New Wave's interest in mind-altering drugs, violating taboos, working for social change, ran up against a brick wall. It arguably ended when the National Guard opened fire on protesting students at Kent State University on May 4, 1970. The innocence of the movement robbed by the Nixon era's embrace of sanctioned criminality and excessive force. Following the post-World War II industrial boom, there were industrial contractions in manufacturing when manufacturing began to be sent overseas. So-called corporate raiders began dismantling manufacturing interests in the United States through acquisitions and liquidations. Jobs and manufacturing went overseas. Politics swung through the liberal technocracy of Jimmy Carter and then back to the conservative presidency of Ronald Reagan. Cold War tensions reached a fever pitch. The late 1970s and 1980s were a time of insurgencies, terrorism, and wars in the Middle East, Soviet-controlled Afghanistan, and Central America. An era that culminated with the operational reveal of the United States F-117 Nighthawk, the so-called stealth fighter, during the invasion of Panama to remove Manuel Noriega from leadership in Panama, is emblematic of these times. Science fiction images entered the real world with the so-called Star Wars weapons platform and the unrealized Freedom Space Station, now known as the International Space Station, or ISS. Computers went from room-sized affairs of governments and corporations to the desktop and the home. And there were a number of works of fiction and nonfiction that explored these shifts before cyberpunk. So some of the fiction, as you can see here on the screen, includes Bernard Wolfe's Limbo from 1952, which is a cybernetic dystopia. Frederick Pohl and Cyril Kornbluth's The Space Merchants from 1953 is about megacorporations and advertising. Then there's Anthony Burgess's A Clockwork Orange from 1962, which is about youth culture and reprogramming. And you're probably maybe more familiar with A Clockwork Orange, the film adaptation directed by Stanley Kubrick. There's John Sladek's The Muller-Fokker Effect from 1970. Download personalities and dehumanization and narrative are all themes of this book. And if you say the name of the book very quickly, you might get an idea of the wink that's also embedded in it. There's James Tiptree Jr.'s The Girl Who Was Plugged In from 1973, which is about virtual reality and telepresence. And then there's Werner Vinge's True Names from 1981, which is about computer hacking and virtual worlds. I mean, in many ways, it reads like playing World of Warcraft on supercharged, highly illegal computing hardware. Some of the nonfiction that leads up to cyberpunk includes Alvin Toffler, who wrote several influential works, including this one here, Future Shock from 1970, in which he writes, quote, "too much change in too short of a period of time," end quote. And he also wrote The Third Wave in 1980. And this concerns what he calls the first wave of technological advance, which would involve agrarian society, like, growing things, farming. The second wave is industrialization and mass production. The third wave he sees as post-industrial, meaning the information age, globalization, and subcultural proliferation. Now, also, you can see here this person with the computer screen kind of overlaid on his face. This is Douglas Engelbart, who lived from 1925 to 2013. And this image is taken from a video recording of what's been called the mother of all demos. And it occurred on December 9th, 1968 at the Fall Joint Computer Conference. Now, this mother of all demos showed off many inventions that Engelbart and his team were responsible for inventing. So besides inventing the computer mouse, he worked with his team at Stanford to create a network computer system that enabled video conferencing, teleconferencing, hypertext, kind of like how the internet works, word processing, object addressing, dynamic file linking, revision control, you think of Git, and collaborative real-time editing, kind of like Google Docs. And this mother of all demos pointed the way for the future way before it was economically feasible for these technologies to be in the home. You have to imagine lots of money went into developing these technologies that were shown off at the mother of all demos. Now, it's important to know about the origins of the term cyberpunk. The term was coined by Bruce Bethke as the title of his story Cyberpunk, published in Amazing Stories in 1983. He tells us, quote, "The invention of the C word was a conscious and deliberate act of creation on my part. I wrote the story in the early spring of 1980, and from the very first draft, it was titled Cyberpunk. And calling it that, I was actively trying to invent a new term that grokked." If you remember, grok is a word that we get from Robert Heinlein, I mentioned before in the Golden Age lectures. So this is like that deep understanding of an idea encapsulated in this word. So I, meaning Bethke, was actively trying to invent a new term that grokked the juxtaposition of punk attitudes and high technology. My reasons for doing so were purely selfish and market-driven. I wanted to give my story a snappy one-word title that editors would remember. How did I actually create the word? The way any new word comes into being, I guess, through synthesis. I took a handful of roots, cyber, techno, et alia, mixed them up with a bunch of terms for socially misdirected youth, and tried out the various combinations until one just plain sounded right, end quote. So let's break down Bethke's cyberpunk term. Cyber comes from Norbert Weiner's cybernetics, which is about feedback and control systems, from the Greek meaning steersman. A steersman would be the person in charge of steering a boat. And the other part of the word, punk, has lots of meanings: worthlessness, marginality, youthfulness, hooliganism, criminality, and even homosexual prostitution. Think of social marginalization as being the root of all of these. In this case, punk likely comes from its appropriation in music, which is about stripping rock and roll to its essence, to jettison the baggage of the 1970s progressive rock movement. Cyberpunk was meant to return science fiction to its pre-New Wave essence. Now, science fiction editor Gardner Dozois popularized the term by using it to describe a core group of the new generation of science fiction writers in an article in the Washington Post on Sunday, December 30th, 1984. And he writes, quote, "Not all of these writers are of the same aesthetic school or movement by any means. Many of them don't even much like each other's work. About the closest thing here to a self-willed aesthetic school would be the purveyors of bizarre, hard-edged, high-tech stuff who have on occasion been referred to as cyberpunks. Bruce Sterling, William Gibson, Louis Shiner, Pat Cadigan, Greg Baird. Nevertheless, they are the 80s generation in SF, or part of it, and whether they like it or not, the similarities in goals and aesthetics between them are much stronger and more noticeable than the admittedly real differences. For one thing, they are all ambitious writers, not satisfied to keep turning out the same old stuff. Once again, it is a time for literary risk-taking, and once again, for those who take them, are admirable, and that makes it an exciting time for SF as a genre," end quote. Now, the SF writer Norman Spinrad argued for a different term in his May 1986 essay, The New Romantics, from Isaac Asimov's science fiction magazine. And it's notable that Gardner Dozois was the editor of Asimov's science fiction magazine at that time. Spinrad saw, I believe correctly, that the romance component of Gibson's triple pun for his 1984 novel Neuromancer, neuro, meaning brain nervous system, necromancer, one who conjures the dead, and new romancer, a new romance, challenge to the hard science by exploring what it means to be human in a post-industrial world. All of these things point toward the fact that the romantic humanistic impulse is combined with the scientific revolution's emphasis on science and technology. What are the characteristics of cyberpunk science fiction? And this is what you should get into your notes. There are 5 of them. First, near future. I'll go over all of them. Near future, interfaces, networks, surfaces, and punk sensibilities. Elaborated, these 5 characteristics are: 1, stories about the near future. Okay. 2, interfaces. Interfaces between body and machine, brain, computer, and also the cyborg. If you remember, a cyborg is a synthesis of an organism and machinery, a combination of the biological with technology. 3, networks. These networks include global capital, meaning money moving around the world, information, political, the political grows stronger, but also interpersonal networks, the connections between individuals. So in this sense, political networks grow stronger, but the connections between individuals become weaker or more difficult to realize. So there's different kinds of networks, and some are stronger, some are weaker. 4, surfaces. We know characters by their names, what they do, what they buy, the performance of their identity, who they work with. Networks again. But this image of mirror shades hide us from their eyes. And the eyes we see as the windows to the soul. Most of the characters want connections to others and to break through these surfaces, but post-industrial culture largely sabotages these efforts. Think back to the lecture on Delaney. If you don't have the language to think or conceptualize something, how can you express it or even think that lack you feel is realizable? So everything's on the surface. There's no depth to things. And then 5, punk sensibilities, including the challenge to authority and hard-boiled prose. Tell the story without all that new wave experimentation. Now, cyberpunk describes the postmodern condition. Gibson's fiction in particular, discussed by the postmodern and Marxist theorist Frederick Jameson, is in play here. Jameson sees Gibson's Neuromancer as emblematic of postmodernism because the global networks of capital are shown to penetrate all aspects of life and identity and create a new human condition. The postmodern condition includes 1, weakening of historicity. History becomes seen as styles, which leads to history being commoditized and consumed. A result of this is the pastiche, that's spelled P-A-S-T-I-C-H-E. A pastiche is parody without politics. A parody, you're making fun of something in order to call out its politics or to call its politics into question. Think of South Park, for example. But a pastiche is doing the parody work, but there's no political edge to it. Now, I should add that some theorists, such as Linda Hutchian, disagrees and sees pastiche itself as a political act. So there's some disagreement here. Now, in the case of cyberpunk, it creates a pastiche of noir, N-O-I-R. Noir is a genre of crime fiction characterized by cynicism, fatalism, and moral ambiguity. There's also collage. There's the remix, making new things from cultural and historical detritus, like things that are thrown away. 2, breakdown of distinction between high and low culture. High culture is like, things that are considered great works of art, classical music, great literature. This is high culture. Low culture is seen as like popular culture, like things you hear on the radio, TV shows, comic books. And so there's this breakdown of a distinction between high and low culture. 3, waning of affect and death of the individual subject. We are fragmented individuals, numbers within the world machine, broken apart and reassembled without the trace of history for experiencing emotion or desire beyond what is dictated by the immediacy of the present. And then 4, a new technology, computers, reproduction instead of production, simulacra and simulations, copies without originals. So all this stuff is going on during this era of cyberpunk. And cyberpunk is both an example of these things as well as a product of these things taking place. Now, the author that you read for today's class and also watched an episode of The X-Files that he wrote is William Gibson. And he was born in 1948 in South Carolina. He's still alive. Now, Gibson moved around to different places with his family because his father was a big construction contractor. Unfortunately, his father died from choking while he was away from home. His mother moved the family back to her home in the Appalachians of Virginia, what are known as the Deep Hollers. Consider the fact that he is claimed by some as a Southern American author and by others as a Canadian writer, which you'll see why in a second. Now, when William Gibson came up for the draft, he told the board that he planned to take every psychedelic substance known to man. He packed his bags and made his way north to Canada, making important contacts in Toronto before settling in Vancouver, where he lives to today with his family. It's important to note that he was never actually drafted. Now, while at the University of California, Riverside, I uncovered many letters and essays written by Gibson for the fanzine community. His fanish output slowed and ultimately ended when he became famous for the kinds of stories that he is known for with Cyberpunk. In the stories like Burning Chrome and his later Sprawl trilogy, which includes Neuromancer from 1984, Count Zero from 1986, and Mona Lisa Overdrive from 1988, William Gibson does some very important things that form some of the key ideas of the cyberpunk movement. And these are things that you should put in your notes. First, rich metaphors deployed to describe the post-industrial world. Take, for example, the opening line of his novel Neuromancer. Quote, "The sky above the port was the color of television tuned to a dead channel," end quote. This is a famous first line. This techno sky is above a port, a place where people and goods enter and leave. It is an interface between one place and another. Above it, we see the unnatural image of the sky, technologized, scrambled, something hidden now in the age of digital HD TV. Before, when you tuned to a channel without a signal, you saw a visual representation of background radio noise. Basically like random black and white squares and squiggles flashing across the screen. A dead channel implies no communication or the breakdown of communication, implying there is too much noise for the passage through the port or interfaces. We also know that William Gibson was a fan of Philip K. Dick, who we encountered in the New Wave SF section. And let's see, around the time that Burning Chrome was published in Omni magazine, Gibson wrote an obituary for Philip K. Dick in the fanzine Wing Window from Seattle, and this obituary was titled "Some Blues for Horse Lover Fat." Again, Horse Lover Fat is Dick's alter ego in his novel Valis, a book that many of Gibson's readers at the time had likely read or knew about. Valis ends with Horse Lover Fat going in search of answers to the 2374 event, but the character Phil Dick stays at home watching TV, looking for answers there. The idea of the TV as an interface offering answers and describing the desire for connection is, I believe, something that Gibson continues from Dick's late fiction. So we have a direct inspiration here in Gibson's writing from Philip K. Dick and the New Wave. Second, Gibson coins the term cyberspace, meaning he created the word cyberspace, which is widely used today to describe the internet and things related to being online. It is mentioned as early as 1982 in reference to a computer deck, but he defines in 1984 in Neuromancer what the word means. The anti-hero Case is watching an educational children's program on TV in the novel. And there's this voiceover, quote, "Cyberspace, a consensual hallucination experienced daily by billions of legitimate operators in every nation by children being taught mathematical concepts. A graphic representation of data abstracted from the banks of every computer in the human system. Unthinkable complexity. Lines of light ranged in the non-space of the mind, clusters and constellations of data, like city lights receding," end quote. The term and its non-place get taken up by popular culture. Issues of phenomenology and ontology from Philip K. Dick are carried over into the post-industrial world here. Third, Gibson writes that, quote, the street finds its own use for things, end quote. This is a recurring phrase in his fiction that means that technology might be designed for one purpose, but human beings can find new uses for these technologies. It also reflects the fact that people are no longer makers, but instead consumers. They buy tools and labels from the big corporations. Fourth, we are all cyborgs because of the networks of technology, networks of power, networks of capital. Our lives are mediated by these networks and the technologies that create them. The networks of capital get so big and complex that they spawn the artificial intelligences in his fiction. And then fifth, he said in a 1993 Fresh Air interview on NPR, National Public Radio, quote, the future has arrived. It's just not evenly distributed yet, end quote. He, like many others before him, including Alvin Toffler and also Marshall McLuhan, who I think I've mentioned before, recognized that the future is already around us in various technologies and cutting-edge science. The problem is that these futuristic aspects of culture have not yet been evenly distributed, meaning not everyone everywhere has access to these technologies yet. In a sense, there are haves and have-nots in this sense to the future, which raises the question, whose future are we talking about? This is an important aspect of what we discussed in the last lecture with Afrofuturism. All futures are not created equal, and it's up to us to create the future that we want, to imagine the future that we want. Now, I want to share two interesting anecdotes with you about Gibson. First, Gibson wrote Neuromancer and Count Zero on a Hermes 2000 typewriter, as you can see on the far left, from the early 20th century. Its keys are made out of celluloid, the same kind of material that used to be used for film projection reels at the movie theater, which means that they occasionally caught fire if his cigarette ash fell on the keys. Gibson admits that he had never used a computer before writing his cyberpunk stories. The inspiration for the cyberspace deck comes from a bus stop ad for the Apple IIc. He thought that was the whole computer. He didn't realize that it needed a separate monitor. However, the Apple IIc wasn't released until April 24, 1984, only 2 months before Neuromancer was published. This means that Gibson is likely mistaken about the inspiration being an Apple IIc, but there were other portable computers such as the Compaq Portable from January 1983 and the Commodore SX64 followed in 1984. So we're not really sure what Gibson based his idea of the cyberspace deck on, but it suffices to say that Gibson did not know anything about computers beyond what he had experienced in SF and in other readings. He did not have first-hand experience of computers, and it is perhaps his not knowing computers that allowed him to imagine something as far out and wild as cyberspace. Second, the Sprawl trilogy became one of the first ebooks ever published. They were released on a single floppy disk by the Voyager company. It was designed to be read on the relatively new Apple Macintosh Portable. Over time and through acquisitions, the Voyager company morphed into what we now know as the Criterion Collection. Like the Criterion Collection DVDs and Blu-ray disc, Voyager wanted to add value to the books through technology and special features. In Gibson's case, a new afterword to his 1980s fiction from the early 1990s that you can find only on that floppy disk, though it has made its way to the internet if you know where to look. Now this week you read William Gibson's short story Burning Chrome, which was published in the July 1982 issue of Omni magazine. Omni magazine specialized in writing about science, technology, futurism, paranormal stuff, and science fiction. The magazine was founded by Bob Guccione, who was also the publisher of the men's magazine Penthouse, and his wife, longtime partner and later wife, Kathy Keaton. Keaton and Guccione were together from 1965 until her death in 1997, which also led to the ending of publication of Omni, which ran from October 1978 to 1997. I can't say enough how cutting edge Omni was as a magazine during that era. So it was a cutting edge upstart in the already established realm of science fiction magazines. And it's not too surprising that Gibson's Burning Chrome found a home in its pages. Now, Burning Chrome concerns the cyber heist of a big-time criminal known as Chrome, a woman who runs a brothel of meat puppets, or prostitutes, who, thanks to a cybernetic implant in their brain, are rendered unconscious while Johns do what they want with their bodies. And this brothel that she runs, that Chrome runs, is called the House of Blue Lights. Now, Automatic Jack, a hardware specialist with a cybernetic arm, and his friend Bobby Quine, a hacker and software specialist, meet a girl named Ricky, who they both become infatuated with. Now, Bobby wants to impress her, so he convinces Jack to use a powerful Russian icebreaker program, a program that hacks through another computer's defensive systems that Jack had obtained to help him pull off a big heist. They target the criminal named Chrome. Jack and Bobby are ultimately successful and steal all of Chrome's ill-gotten money, but they discover that Ricky had been selling her body as a meat puppet in Chrome's House of Blue Lights and used that money to buy an exclusive set of Zeiss Icon cybernetic eyes, which she had wanted so as to gain opportunities for work in the entertainment industry. However, Jack knows that Ricky really wanted to go to Chiba City in Japan instead of Hollywood, where she plans to go. So he secretly changes her flight to go to Chiba City with a return trip option, a round trip ticket, essentially. But after she leaves, she never returns, and Jack and Bobby never see Ricky again. Now, I also asked you to watch the X-Files episode titled Kill Switch, which was co-written by William Gibson and another cyberpunk writer, Tom Maddox. Now, just a little background. The X-Files was created by Chris Carter for the Fox Network's Friday night lineup. It stars David Duchovny as Special Agent Fox Mulder, who represents the romantic, and Gillian Anderson as Special Agent Dana Scully, who represents the scientific. It was originally on the air from 1993 to 2002 for 9 seasons, but its story is continued in 2 films, Fight the Future in 1998 and I Want to Believe in 2008, and in 2 television revivals in 2015 and 2017. Its central story follows Mulder and Scully, who investigate the so-called X-Files, cases too strange and weird to be taken seriously by the FBI. There's an overarching mythos of alien colonization facilitated by the duplicitous shadow government known as the Syndicate. Its popularity led to 2 spin-off shows, Millennium and The Lone Gunman. Kill Switch is what we call a Monster of the Week episode, which means that its story is self-contained and doesn't really contribute to the overarching X-Files mythos. It is a cyberpunk story that features goths and artificial intelligence and transcendence of the body by digitizing the human mind and uploading it to the internet. It aired on February 15th, 1998, which is 16 years after Burning Chrome and 14 years after Neuromancer. And here in this screen capture from the episode, you can see Mulder in the foreground with Invisigoth looking at a computer that had been taken from this dead hacker's hands at the beginning of the episode. And in the background, you can see the 3 lone gunmen who often help Mulder and Scully in some of their investigations. and Dana Scully off to the right in the background. There are two other cyberpunk writers who I'd like you to be familiar with. They are Bruce Sterling and Pat Cadigan. Bruce Sterling was born in 1954 in Texas, but he currently lives in Italy. There are 5 things I'd like you to know about his contributions to science fiction. First, he wrote the Shaper/Mechanist stories. These are collected in Schismatrix, spelled Schismatrix, published in 1985, and Crystal Express, published in 1989. He imagined a near future in which there would be 2 mutually exclusive approaches to human augmentation. Shapers are all about biological intervention, changing the body biologically. And then there's the mechanists, Mechanists, who are all about technological intervention in the body. In both cases, human beings were slated to become cyborgs of one kind or another in order to cope with the rapidly changing technology and living conditions, such as living on a polluted Earth, living in outer space, etc. He imagined new ways of human existence in these stories that questions what it means to be human at all. Second, he edited the collection titled Mirror Shades, the Cyberpunk Anthology in 1986. Sterling was the great popularizer and promoter of cyberpunk. This anthology gave him a platform to define what the revolution was in the manifesto-like preface that you can find online. You can just search for Sterling preface to Mirror Shades. Third, considering his promotion of cyberpunk, it is important to note that Sterling ignores a lot of cyberpunk's forebears, especially women writers like Joanna Russ and James Tiptree Jr., who we talked about before, also known as Alice B. Sheldon. Fourth, Sterling published a fanzine from 1983 to 1986 called Cheap Truth under the pseudonym Vincent Omniveritas. Vincent meaning conquer, omnia meaning all, and veritas meaning truth, conquer all truth. In its last issue, it reports that Omniveritas had been shot and killed. The revolution was over. It had ended nearly as soon as it had begun. And fifth, Sterling coined the term slipstream. Slipstream describes speculative fiction stories that are ambiguously between science fiction, fantasy, and mainstream literature. And so there's a lot of works that are described as slipstream now, thanks to this term that he coined. Now, Pat Cadigan, she was born in 1953 in New York. She studied in the United States, in Massachusetts and Kansas, but she now lives in London. Unlike the other cyberpunks, she studied literature and science fiction to some extent. She studied in particular with James Gunn, one of the early innovators who argued for the study and teaching of science fiction in higher education at the University of Kansas. And unfortunately, James Gunn recently passed away. Because Cadigan's fiction doesn't posit a conceptual breakthrough or paradigmatic shift like Sterling's Shaper-Mechanist stories assert, her fiction is more like Gibson's. The future is already here, but is not yet equally distributed. Never will be, and things will continue on much as they had done in the past, simply with new gear. Some of the central themes in her work include, first, neuronarratives, or stories in which the brain biology, and neurotechnologies are central to the story. Put another way, the brain is where the action is at. Second, she values marginalized art and creative work, hacking, music, and video. Third, identity is tied to the psychology of mind as much as to the biology of the brain. Technologies can allow us to share identity through memory, and if we're not careful with our brain-computer interfaces, we threaten our sense of self. Some of Cadigan's work to consider includes Rock On from 1984, which is about cyborg enhancements in computer technologies to facilitate shared psychedelic experiences generated by Sinners, spelled Synners. The world of Sinners is shown to be more complicated and dangerous by the rapid development of new technology and antagonistic artificial intelligences in the novel Sinners, 1991. Pretty Boy Crossover is a short story from 1986, and it's about virtual reality and the simulation of human intelligence. It raises questions about agency and exploitation, and its central theme, as is true of much cyberpunk, is the post-human. Fools from 1992 deals with the fragmentation of identity. Tea from an Empty Cup from 1998 and Dervish is Digital from 2000 concerns a bleak world where many escape it through online life and artificial reality, or AR. Other cyberpunk films and television that you should check out include Tron from 1982, Blade Runner from 1982, Videodrome from 1983, The Last Starfighter from 1984, RoboCop from 1987, Max Headroom from 1987 to 1988, Akira from 1988, The Lawnmower Man from 1992, Johnny Mnemonic, 1995, based on one of William Gibson's short stories, Strange Days from 1995, Ghost in the Shell from 1995, Pi from 1998, Existence from 1998, and of course The Matrix from 1999. So that wraps up Cyberpunk, and I know it's a big information dump in this next to last lecture in the class, but it sets out, a lot of the things that provided a foundation, I think, for a lot of science fiction that we see today, both in positive and negative ways. But I would highly recommend you check out some of the video, like some of the films, some of the television that are related to this. But also your video games are a big part of this, and you can probably think of some, from that follow after this era, particularly in the 2000s into the 2010s, and even today now with Cyberpunk 2077, which is in turn based on a tabletop role-playing game, which was inspired by Cyberpunk. So what do we got coming up? This is your last weekly writing assignment due by next week. You remember, it's just 250 words summarizing the readings in the lecture. Also, next week is when everything in the class comes due. These are all things that you should have been working on for some time, so I'm not expecting this to be like a mad crunch. I know, though, for some folks, if you've procrastinated or other things have come up, that may be the case, and I apologize for that, but all of these things have been introduced far in advance in the hopes of making this like an easy transition to just submitting things and getting done with the class. So for next week, you got the weekly writing assignment due. You'll have your final notebook, handwritten notes, scanned as a PDF and uploaded to Dropbox. You'll have your final exam, handwritten, again, scanned as a PDF, uploaded to Dropbox. And then you're going to have your research essay, which is due as an OpenLab post that I'm about to show you how to submit. And again, the reason why I have you submit your research essay on OpenLab is multiple-fold. On the one hand, it's great for you to get some more digital experience, like being able to write online and be able to use real digital technologies that you can make claims to on your resume. OpenLab is based on WordPress. So now, after publishing your essay on our OpenLab site, you can say that you know how to publish content using WordPress. If I had you turn this in just emailed to me or turning it on Blackboard, there's nothing big or important about that. You can't put that on your resume. But by using OpenLab, I'm giving you an opportunity to make some claims in your resume and give you a little bit more experience using real-world technologies. Also, being able to put this out there gives you something that you can point to. You can link to it later on if you want to share this on linkedin.com on your profile there, which if you don't have one, you should make one. It's great to have a professional portfolio or a profile there where you can like show your work experience, show your educational experience, and I guarantee you can pay dividends whenever you start looking for work, even now before you begin your career. The same is true for having an online portfolio, which you can create on OpenLab, your own web space to show off what you know how to do. And you can collect work that you've published on OpenLab into that e-portfolio. Everybody can make one. I even have one there for my teaching, but you can have one to show off like what you've learned at CityTech. Now, finally, the late work last due date that I can accept anything is Tuesday, May 25th. Okay, remember that. I prefer you get things in on time Wednesday, May 19th. But if you need that extra time, just drop me an email by Wednesday, May 19th to let me know, hey, Professor Ellis, sorry, I needed a little extra time on this assignment. Let me know what it is and tell me that you're going to get it to me by Tuesday, May 25th, the end of day. That way I know to be looking for it. Because if you can imagine, right now I'm getting like 1 billion emails a day from everybody about everything. I don't want anything to get missed. So if you can give me a heads up, it helps me keep an eye out for things to prime me to be looking for it. All right, so let me show you now how to submit your work on OpenLab. So here I am on our OpenLab site, course site. And just as a reminder, make sure before you turn in your weekly writing assignments that you're logged in. I've seen a lot of folks that aren't actually logging into OpenLab. They're just going to the site, and then you're probably seeing it ask you for your name and email address, and you just fill that out and then submit, which is fine. I'm still getting your work, but it categorizes your work separately from your account. So I'm having to count your work in 2 different places, basically. So remember to make sure, first off, you're logged in. And you'll know if you're logged in or not because you'll either see your name up here in the upper right-hand corner, or you're going to see an option to log in to OpenLab. So after you've logged in, come to our OpenLab course site right here. You're going to see Boba Fett and all his pals here. And then what you do is you put your mouse right over this plus sign, and you just mouse over that, and then you click on post. What that does is you're going to create a new post. Give it a second. All right, so this is the composition window, what's called the block editor on WordPress. And there's a couple of things I need you to just kind of pay attention to in this demo for submitting your work. So first off, like here in the top where you have these big letters where it says add title, that's where you write in the title for your post. So if we were to go back to our OpenLab site, just to give you an example, Lecture Week 13, that's my title for this post. Okay, so that's separate from all this writing that I do in the post. So your post has a title, and then you have content that goes into the post. So for your title, why don't we give it the title that you gave to your essay? And so I would suggest putting it into quotation marks. So how about, say, like if I were to write something about, let's say I chose Star Wars, the film, for my essay. I would want to come up with something interesting and catchy. I could just say something like, is Star Wars science fiction? That could be like the title of my essay. It's a provocative title because I think a lot of people just knee-jerk reaction. Yes, Star Wars is science fiction, but let's say I wanted to write my essay questioning that, because there are a lot of aspects to Star Wars that defy science, or what we know about science, and there's no real good explanation for that. So I could have written my essay about Star Wars and questioning whether it is or not science fiction. So after I've written my title in quotation marks, skip one space, and then say by, and then give me your name, by whatever your name is. Now your name is going to be attached to the post regardless of you doing this, but by putting it in the title, it makes it more noticeable. It lets people see that is by you. You are supposed to take ownership of this writing. This is an example of your work, your thinking, your research. I want you to be proud of it. So let's put your name there right in the title. So start off with what you titled your research essay, whatever it is. We could also, like if we were to say something else like, how about the science fictional world of James Cameron's Avatar. That's a cool title if I were to choose Avatar, the film, as my example for my essay. And then, so put that in quotes, have a space, say bye, then another space, and then write your name. Just first, last name, or however you want to go by, okay? It doesn't matter to me what you put there as long as it's what name you go by. Some people like to use like maybe their first initial rather than their full name. That's fine too. Whatever you want to put that is you is what you should put there. Now, after you've done that, you take your mouse and you see this part here where it says start writing or type to choose a block. Click one time there. That allows you to begin writing your research essay. But your research essay is already written. I wanted you to write it in a word processor like Google Docs, Microsoft Word, Apple Pages. So open your research essay wherever it is. You've already done spell check on it. You've done peer review. You should have seen my email earlier this week offering you all a chance to do peer review one another if you can. Again, it's not required, but it's highly encouraged. You should ask your friends, your family members to read over your essay and give you some feedback, like how to make it better, maybe catch mistakes. But then also, don't forget, read that essay out loud by yourself and think as you're reading it aloud, how can I write or fix things, make things better, clearer? Are there any mistakes I need to correct? Are my MLA citations correct? All of those things you want to be thinking about. Also remember, you want to be using MLA style for all your quotations, followed by your parenthetical citations, your author name, space, and the page number or paragraph number. And then remember at the end of your essay, a works cited list. And remember, the works cited list should not just include maybe some of those definitions that I gave you to work with, your own research through the databases. Don't forget to cite the science fiction work that you're talking about. So like in this example, if I'm writing my essay about James Cameron's Avatar, I need to have an entry in the works cited list for Avatar, the movie. So whatever you've chosen, if you're writing about a video game, if you're writing about a comic book, whatever it is, make sure it's also in the works cited list. Now, if you're not sure like how to do those works cited entries, if I do a search on Google for Purdue OWL MLA, it's going to bring me to the MLA formatting and style guide that I told you guys about. This is what I would rely on for this. So remember, first off, this MLA in-text citations, the basics, that shows you how to do the parenthetical citations after quotes. So check that out. You got to do that. Then for your works cited list, you have all these examples: works cited page, basic format, books, periodicals, electronic sources, other common sources. So we click on other common sources and scroll down, and this is where you're going to start seeing things like a song or album, films or movies, television shows, an entire TV series, podcasts, albums, digital files. You can also, if you don't see like a great match here, you can also just do a Google search for, like, let's say I go back to Google. How about I don't see an example there for video games, and I know some folks are working on video games. Let's see what we can find to help us cite that correctly. So if I were to type in MLA works cited video game, and here the very first hit is actually by the MLA. This is their website, style.mla.org. How do I cite a video game? Why don't we use their resources, since they're obviously This is the coming out of the horse's mouth. Find out how to cite a video game. And here they give some examples. Minecraft, Pac-Man. Basically, it's just the title of the video game, who published it, and then the date. Pac-Man, Atari, 1982. You may make distinctions. So like Pac-Man arcade version is different, obviously, than the one made for Atari, because the arcade version was published by Midway. And you give the date. If you're talking about the Windows PC version, who published it and the year that it was published. So there's a lot of examples here that you can use for that works cited list at the end of your essay. So after you've got all that typed up, you're very happy with the way it looks, you click in this part of the essay. Make sure I've seen some students by accident like put their whole essay in the title. Don't do that. Don't do that. That won't look right. You'll know that doesn't look right, okay? So don't do that. And if you do make a mistake like that, don't forget you can either undo something you've done by clicking this icon right here, or you can press Control-Z or Command-Z on your keyboard to undo the last thing that you did. So if you screw up, don't worry. You can fix things. But what we're going to do is click in this box down here, so we get the cursor in the actual content area for your post on OpenLab. And this is where you paste your essay from your word processing document. And so you can either right click and choose paste, or you can press Control V or Command V on your keyboard, and that will paste all your work from your Google Doc or Word doc or Apple Pages file into the post on OpenLab. Now, that's not everything. Everything's not done yet. You need to look through, scroll through what you've just pasted and make sure it looks right. It may have added like an extra space between paragraphs that you can click and delete or hit backspace to get rid of. Make it look the way you want. But do keep in mind, I understand that the way it looks in your word processing document may not look identical whenever you put it on WordPress. That's okay. I'm not going to grade you on that aspect. But you do need to make sure that it looks halfway decent, right? That there's not like, weird characters, problems with like, several extra lines somewhere that shouldn't be there. Go through and clean it up. Make it look as presentable and as consistent as possible. Go down a little bit further and make sure like your works cited section, right? If you remember from MLA, if you look through the website to see how this should look, your works cited needs to be centered on the page. And so let's see where we need to go. Right there. So this icon here, after I've selected some text, so I'm going to select works cited. I'm going to click that icon, and I can change the alignment of that text. And I want to change it to align text center. That's the only real part of your essay that needs to be centered, but you need to remember to do that to make this that you put on OpenLab look as close as possible to the way it looks in your word processing document. Now, the last thing, when it comes to all your entries under the works cited list, those, it would be too complicated in WordPress to give it an hanging indent like it should look in your word processing document. So don't worry about your hanging indents when you come over to your works cited list on WordPress, on OpenLab, okay? You don't have to worry about that part. I'm not gonna, there will be no points taken off for that. So after you've looked over everything, it looks right, you're ready to publish it, hold off. There's one other thing you gotta do before you publish this thing. Go and click on the document tab right here, because it'll probably be over on block. So you gotta click over to document. Scroll down, and then under categories, you want to scroll and look for research essay. Let me scroll that down a little bit more so I'm not in the way. There we go. And you see research essay here. Put a check next to research essay. What that does is it categorizes your work so that on the left menu of our OpenLab site, there's a menu option for research essay. So that way you can click on that and that'll lead you to all the research essays published by everybody in the class. So it's a way of organizing our OpenLab site and keeping things clean and uncluttered. So make sure you put a check next to research essay. So you do a final check, you got a check next to research essay, you look at your title, you make sure it looks good, you look over your essay, everything looks like it's formatted right, everything has been copy and pasted over, you're ready to go, you click publish, and then you click publish a second time, and then just wait a moment, and you'll get a confirmation here that your essay is published. And then, just to make sure that that it's there and I can see it, click on the title of our page where it says English 2420 OL 74 Science Fiction. Click that. If it asks you to leave page, you leave page, scroll down, and you see research essay. You click that, and then your essay should be here. You scroll down, and you should find your essay. If you don't see it, all you got to do is try again. Mouse over that plus sign, go to post, and then type your title there. There should be your title in quotes by your name. Then click in the box here below that, copy and paste your essay from your word processor into OpenLab WordPress. Correct the works cited title, make sure that's centered. And then all of your works cited entries will be left justified underneath that. Look it over, make sure everything is there, nothing's missing. Then click on the document tab, scroll down to categories, put a check next to research essay, just like that. And then click publish, and then click publish one more time. And then that'll put it up on our OpenLab site and make it live. And that'll be something you can link to later on from linkedin.com or your own personal website or your ePortfolio if you make one on OpenLab, which I, again, would recommend you do that. All right, so there's all that. So that's how to turn in your research essay. And so I'm going to post with this week's lecture underneath the lecture post links and reminders for when everything is coming up due. And also remember, if anything you need to turn in late, turn it in and just drop me an email letting me know you turned it in late. Any of the past weekly writing assignments, if you didn't turn in the midterm notebook, you can still turn that in. If you want to combine it with your final notebook, that's fine, but just like drop me an email to let me know to look over your notebook carefully so I don't miss anything whenever I grade that to give you credit for both your midterm and your final notebook. But everything is due Wednesday, May 19th. But if you need to turn in something late, I can receive it up to Tuesday, May 25th. Okay? If anybody's got questions about any of that, let me know. Remember, I got office hours Wednesday from 3 to 5. I'll also have my office hours Wednesday, May 19th from 3 to 5. And for that last week, there won't be a lecture. There's no need to, but I will be available that day for office hours. So stop by, come ask me questions, or just talk to me about science fiction. Doesn't matter. You can also email me, jellis@citytech.cuny.edu. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And if you need to talk to me about something and can't meet during office hours, let me know your availability, and we'll find a time that matches my schedule and yours, and then we can talk then. So that's everything in a nutshell. I appreciate you all, you're hanging in there, making it through the semester. We're almost there. Everything's coming up due for our class. I know everything's coming up due for your other classes as well. One last thing I will mention that I didn't mention earlier this semester, and I'll give you a link to this on our lecture post this week as well. This is something that doesn't have anything to do with science fiction, but might be beneficial to some of you, especially with the summer coming up, as you're looking for work or either for part-time work or looking for work in your major. If you look on OpenLab, and I'll give you a direct link to this. Well, first off, I've already given you a link to this, but I'll remind you about this, that we have a special site on OpenLab for science fiction at CityTech. And anything involving science fiction stuff at CityTech, I'll post here. So even though you're leaving my class, I would bookmark this site. Remember to check it out from time to time, just to kind of have your ear to the ground to find out what is coming up with science fiction at CityTech. You know, we have an annual symposium where we get scholars from around the world to come talk and share their ideas at CityTech, and you can be a part of that. So stay tuned to this. Also, you can find out about the CityTech Science Fiction Collection. This is one of the biggest collections of science fiction in the United States, if not on, especially on the Eastern Seaboard. That's got near complete runs of all the major science fiction magazines, lots of novels. You can't check things out, but we can arrange for folks to go in and use these materials when campus is back open. So this is a great resource for all of us at CityTech to use. The other thing that I wanted to tell you guys about is a site that I made for all my students, and it's available for anybody to use at CityTech, and it's called Job Search Advice. And this is a site that I made that has a full lecture on all the different ways to write a resume, how to write a job application letter, how to get prepared for interviews, all this stuff. Also how to research jobs, because believe it or not, if you're not really familiar with the job application process, you need to find out as much as you can about the job listings and where you might be applying for, so that you can write the best resume customized for those jobs, the best letter to get noticed for an interview. All that stuff pays off in order to get you the job you want. I created sample documents that give you some, you just download them and then you can edit them to help make your own resumes and job application letters. And I also give a lot of links about where to find jobs, how to do research, other advice about resumes, cover letters, preparing for interviews, and other general job hunting advice, as well as writing resources and other resources at CityTech to help you find jobs. So there's a lot of great stuff here that I want you to be aware of, and you can use this anytime you want. And if you ever need to talk about jobs, if you need a job, like a recommendation letter, you can reach out to me. Also, build great relationships with your professors in your major, because you'll want to ask them for recommendation letters. Just general advice like that I've tried to make available to you all, because I want to see you all be successful when you leave CityTech. All right, so again, email address jls@citytech.cuny.edu. Office hours Wednesday 3 to 5 this week, and my last office hours will be next week on Wednesday, May 19th. If anybody's got anything, make sure you contact me. I wish you all good luck, not just in our class, but in all your classes. And once we all come back to campus, we're all vaccinated, we're all healthy, stop by my office. It's NAM 520. I'd be glad to meet you in person and be able to talk science fiction with you, okay? So take care and see this thing through and finish the spring semester on a great note for all of us. So take care.